Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video, I'll show you how I painted Vasillac the Gifted from the Dread Pageant. Here we go, here he is, all ready to go, Vasillac the Gifted. This is the leader from the Dread Pageant, and this is the warband included in the Underworlds Diachasm set. And he's all primed and ready to go, and with a Wraithbone Contrast undercoat paint. And the paints we'll be using in this video are mostly contrast paints with a few Vallejo and some shade and layer paints as well. And the brush I use a lot is the Wargamer character brush by Army Painter, but I've also used the Kolinsky number 2 size, which I really like. Okay, let's get into it. So we've got the Agorist Dunes, the first contrast paint, and this is going to go over all the sand texture that's included on the base here. And these bases are great in the Underworld sets. They're already pre-formed and ready for us to paint. And so I'm going to go over all that area. I'm being quite generous here. I'm getting a lot of this paint into those recesses, really working it in, just being careful not to get it on the rest of the model. Then I'm going to take some Basilicanum Grey, and this is going to go over all the kind of stone aspects of this model too, of the base. And so giving that a nice coat, again working it into those cracks and crevices and just pushing that paint around, making sure it goes where I want it to go and being fairly generous, but then just pushing the paint. So as I get to like the feet and things like that, I'm taking a little bit more care and just kind of having less paint on my brush as I approach those spots. Then we're going to take some layer Stormhost Silver, and this is going to go over all the silver and even the gold parts of this model. So anything that's metal is going to get a base coat of this Stormhost Silver, and I want this to be quite bright. I want these to be quite bling looking characters, and so I want this gold to really stand out. So with the Stormhost Silver, we're going to put a contrast paint over it to give the gold effect, and for the silver we'll pretty much leave it as it is with a little shade over the top. So I'm just going over every bit of metal I can see here, taking my time, really blocking this in now, getting all those sections covered with a nice layer. And I don't water this down at all, I just use it as it is from the pot, give it a really good shake, and then just get the brush to a nice tip, just roll it through the paint, and then just take my time applying it. We can always tidy up if we do make a mistake and go over the edges onto the other sections. We can just go back to our Wraithbone layer paint and touch up any areas we do make a mistake on. But, you know, take your time. Although we're only looking for a tabletop ready standard here with this model, we still want it to look nice, and keeping it neat is key to getting a nice result from this contrast method. And so I keep going over the mask there, really working it in, get the top of the spear and down there those spiky bits all nice and covered. And then once we've kind of done that bit, we'll move down just a little bit at the bottom of the spear that we want to be metal to, and so I just move the model to make it easier for myself to get to, just give that a nice coat. Then we're on to 2 more paints now. This is Contrast Talisar Blue and Apothecary White, and I'm doing equal measure, 1 part of the blue to 1 part of the white, and this is going to tone that blue down a little bit, and this is really going to give us a nice deep shade to work on these furs. And you'll see like the picture that's included with the Diachasm box, it's kind of quite white, these furs, but there's a blue shadow in there, so I'm using this to give me that blue shadow, and we'll see if it worked later on, but we'll do some dry brushing over this once it's completely dried, and that's going to give us an effect quite close to the picture, I think, but fairly easy to do. And so never be afraid to mix these contrast paints together. I think this colour came out really nice. The Talisar blue is just a stunning colour anyway, but mixing it with that white really gave it a real creamy look, and it looks really nice, so it's really happy with that. Using a little bit less paint on my brush now. There's a fair bit going on to those furs to get in all the texture, but here I just want to put a little bit of this mix over the eyes on the shield and that little almost like mirror thing that's on the top of it, and so I'm just going over there very gently here with this. We're going to cover it with the shade later on, and also dry brush too, so it's not going to stand out as much as it does here, but I think this gives us a nice base. Right, now I'm taking the contrast black Templar, and now we're going to block in all the areas of black leather on the model. I'm just starting with a waistcoat here. I haven't got too much paint on my brush. I don't want to go crazy here, and so I think the temptation is often to put a lot of contrast paint on, but you've got to get a balance really between the different sections that require a lot of paint and the sections that don't. So with the furs and with lots of texture, you can get away with putting a lot more paint on, and also here you can put a fair amount on to get it in those crevices and to create the dark shadows. but on the areas, the more like flatter areas, you don't want to swamp it with paint. So it's just getting that balance right. But where you want to kind of use that paint to its best is to start and finish your brush strokes where you want most of the paint to build up, then push and pull that contrast paint around so that you get it in the cracks and crevices and all those shadows come through. And then on the smoother, flatter areas, just work that paint off. And if you find you've got too much paint on the model or on your brush, you can just wick some of it away on some kitchen towel off your brush, and then go back with the brush and soak up some more of that paint, and then move it to other parts of the model where you want it to go. So here I'm just putting a little bit on the handle, and then also just on the little teeth of the shield here. I was going to go with like a grey, but I thought I'd just go black, and then I think they needed a little bit of black there just to tie it in with the other sections of the model. So just taking my time again, hardly any paint on the brush now, almost like a felt tip pen, just colouring those in. Now we're going to take the Wraithbone layer paint, and this is a little tidy up stage, and I do this quite a lot through the different layers. So I'm just going over any areas where I've gone over the lines and I've made any little mistakes, and I'll put a nice coat of this on there to cover it up. Sometimes you might need two, but most of the time one coat does it, and just make it nice and neat so all these lines are really crisp, and that's going to give you a really nice finish to your model at the end. Our next paint is a Nazdreg yellow, and this is a great contrast paint, not too bright a yellow, but it will certainly make a really nice bright gold over this Stormhost Silver. So I'm just going over all the gold sections now that we can see. So the top of this little part on his helmet here, we're going to go all around the shield, little sections of the spear, but just really being careful not to go over the mask at this stage. So blocking it in. You don't even have to go right up to the lines if you don't want to, because once we put the shade over this, that's going to give us a little bit of a shadow. But here where we've got the little grooves in the bits of the spear, that's where these contrast paints really like to go. So that paint's going to get sucked right in there. It's going to want to go in on its own, and it's going to give a real nice dark shadow. And what I try and do is use the contours of the model to wipe the paint off my brush, so almost scraping that paint into the sections where I want most of it to build up, and then that really gives a dark shade that we want. So, and that's where this Nazdreg yellow is really good. You've got other options that you can use for gold. Agorist Dunes is really good. It's a bit more of a like kind of richer, darker gold. You can even use Giliman Flesh for an old brassy, bronzy gold look, and that works well too. And then of course mixing them all together can give you loads of results. But for these, I want them to be really bling, and so I want this bright gold. And at the moment, it looks way too bright. It looks way too yellow. But don't worry, we're going to tone it down with some shade, and then we're also going to highlight again at the end with some Stormhost Silver. And what that's going to do is really kind of keep it nice and bling, but it's just going to take away from that like fake yellowy colour that we can see right now. Okay, the next paint is a contrast Magos purple, and this is quite a pale purple. You've got two in the range. You've got Shyish purple and Magos, and you can choose whichever one you like. But I find for the Dread Pageant, doing two coats of this Magos purple works really well. So I'm starting off with this little part of the spear here, and I'm going straight over the Wraithbone, but you could also have done the metal paint, the Stormhost Silver, over this section of the spear and then put this over if you wanted to, but I wanted to keep it quite matte, so I wanted to come away from the metallic look on this section. And you can see here where I want it a little bit darker, where it meets the gold, I'm just taking a little bit more paint off my brush and applying it there. Right, now we're on to the cloak, and I'm being a bit more generous now and trying to give it a nice coat all over that cloak. And because we're going to give this paint two coats, we don't want to be too heavy here with this first coat, and I was a little bit heavy-handed with this section, so I had to kind of spread it round. I had to try and get that brush to soak that paint back up and then move it to other sections. So I should have put a little bit less paint on my brush for this first layer, and here I put a little bit too much on as well. If I was doing the darker Shyish purple, then I would have done one thick coat like this, and it would have worked out really nice. It would give it a nice deep colour. But with this Magos purple, I think two coats with a little bit less paint would have worked a lot better and given a neater finish at the end. So if you wanted to do this method and copy the way I've done it, then I would say just do a little bit less paint than I've done on this section here, because it was a little bit too much. But still came out okay, and for tabletop ready, I was really happy with it. But we can certainly make improvements on it for sure. So there we go, that's that first coat, and while that's drying, I took the Pterodon Turquoise, one of my favourite colours from the contrast range. This is really nice teal colour, and this is going to go over this little bit of whatever it is, little bit of fancy material hanging off his spear, and we're also going to put it over the headpiece of the helmet, and then just pick out any other parts of the model that we can see that this colour has. And so being quite generous with this, because I think it gives some really nice dark shadows, and we're also going to dry brush this section later too. So I'm putting a decent amount on my brush here, and certainly on this headpiece there's lots of little dimples and grooves, and that paint's going to want to go in there, but be extra careful here not to get it onto that metal that we've already done. So again, you don't have to go right up to the edge, you don't have to go right up to the part you've already painted in gold, and because we can use a shade over that gold to give us the little shadow where the two different materials meet. So, but go as close as you can for best results. Now I'm just doing this little bottle or pouch here as well. It's going to give this one coat, and quite thick, and I try to move it so it's thicker in one part than another to give that effect. Now we're on to Apothecary White. I wanted to tone down that fur a little bit before we move on to the highlight. So I'm just taking that Apothecary White, not too much on my brush, and I'm just trying to go over the more raised areas. So I'm not swamping it with paint, and I'm certainly not pushing it into all the recesses here this time. I just want to give almost a light coat over the raised areas just to tone it down a little bit, and then that's going to almost give us a mid shade, I suppose. So we'll have that nice blue shadow coming through and then the highlight later. Right, now we've gone back to the Magos purple, and I'm going to give one relatively thin coat all over this now, and that's just going to strengthen those shadows, and it's going to give us a little bit of a neater finish overall on this cloth material. And there's quite a lot of flat areas here, which I find contrast paint isn't the best for. It really likes to have lots of folds and creases, and that's where it really comes to its own. I think that's why it works so well with things like the Corvus Cabal and the Untamed Beasts. They got lots of texture going on with all the different parts of the models there. But it worked okay here, but just beware that you put in this second coat on just to get it nice and even, not too much paint, and give it a nice even coat all over, and so then that'll give you a nice smoother result. You could potentially even go over this 3 times if you wanted to, so rather than trying to do it in 2. And now I put a little bit too much paint on, so you see I dotted the paint on, then wiped some off my brush before going back to it. Right, now we're on to the shade, which is a Nuln Oil. And now I'm going to use this Nuln Oil to go over all the metallic paint that we've already done. So anything that was metal, including the blue and the gold and the silver, we're going to give it a nice coat of this Nuln Oil. And on the same way we do with the contrast paint, we want to start and finish our brushstroke where we want most of the paint to build up. But this is a little bit thinner than contrast paint, so it's going to want to run into those recesses really nicely. So you may have to keep going back and forward to the pot and then push it right in there. You can see on the shield, those eyes have really absorbed it and kind of really taken away the brightness of that blue, but it's going to keep it there as a little hint in the background, which will work really nicely. So I'm just going to continue with this shade over all the metal. I'm going back to the teeth here, and you can see I'm wiping my brush almost against the grooves, and then that brings out those little recesses and all that little bit of texture really nicely. And the same on the musk. I'm going to put some in and then push it along. Here I put a little bit too much, so I'm trying to suck that paint up with my brush, and then I wipe it onto another section and then do the same again, and then I can go back and forth moving it around. If you did this and you had too much paint but didn't have another section to do, you could just wipe your brush on some kitchen towel and then absorb that shade, that Nuln Oil, back onto your brush, no problem. But there we go. So that's one way of doing it, and then I'm just moving that shade around then where I put it on the spear and making sure it goes where I want it to go. Okay, now the next paint, we're going back to the Wraithbone. It's for another tidy up phase. So now we're preparing to do all the fleshy areas. So I'm just going to make sure that those lines are nice and neat and crisp, and that's going to give us the best result possible. So you can see this is pretty simple for a tabletop ready standard, but keeping it neat like this is really going to help with the end result. Okay, now we're on to Giliman Flesh, and just straight up Giliman Flesh, I'm going to go over all the skin and flesh areas, but I'm not going to put a load of this on, so I'm not going crazy with the amount of paint on my brush. Just a little bit, like almost like a really wet felt tip pen. I'm rubbing that on and giving it a nice even coat. And you see on this guy on Vasillac, he's got lots of scars and texture on his skin, and we're going to go over that later with another colour to bring those out. But here we just want to give it a nice even coat, and you see that with all those texture and scars that are raised up, they're really giving the contrast paint something to grip onto and giving us a nice little shadow. But here I'm trying to put more paint in this little triangular shape here, I'm trying to get more paint to build up against the other textures for that shadow. Right, now I'm going to take some contrast Volupus pink, and then I'm just using this now like a normal felt tip pen. I don't want too much paint on this at all, and I'm just gently tracing over all those like scars and raised areas over the flesh here. And so I want these to stand out quite a bit. On the picture it's quite subtle, but I want them to be quite harsh and really standing out. And I really love this Volupus pink, and I think against the purple, the Magos purple that we've used, I think this is going to work really nicely. So I'm just taking my time, going over it there, and then on the model on the arm as well. Again, move the model so that you've got a nice firm grip. You can rest your arms on the table so you're not shaking too much, and for then little detail bits like this, you've got loads of control. So let the model do the work for you. Right, now we're on to a white Vallejo 0.951, and I'm going to use this very vegan makeup brush. Just costs a couple of pounds, but super soft bristles, and I'm going to load those bristles up with the white paint, and then just using a piece of cardboard, I'm going to work that paint into the bristles, and then try and get as much paint as I can off the brush. And cardboard's great because you can really get a good idea of how much paint's coming off before you go to your model. And I'm going straight over all the areas of the base now. So I'm going to avoid the feet and everything, but I'm going to go over all the sand that we did and all that stonework that we did earlier too. And this might seem like usually you don't need white to highlight. You'd use something like you could almost use like a really pale beige to highlight this, and even a pale grey on the stonework. But for the images for the Dread Pageant, it was really white, the base. So I've gone with white on that base there. And then on the little furry cloak on the top here, I'm just going to dry brush this white on there as well, and that's going to give us a good look that's pretty close to what we saw for the images for the Dread Pageant included with Diachasm. But here I'm being really careful. I don't want to get this on any other sections, so that's where this shape of brush works really well. Now I'm taking a Sky Grey 0.989, and I want to do this over the teal colour. So exactly the same thing. We work that paint into the bristles, get as much as we can off the cardboard, and then I'm using this Sky Grey over all these kind of turquoise areas. And this grey against turquoise I think works really nicely. It's not as bright as that white, but you know, when you compare it, it almost looks like you've used the same colour to highlight all the different sections. Now I'm going back to Stormhost Silver, and this is a dry brush again. I'm using the same brush, and I haven't cleaned the brush in between these stages either. I've just made sure all the paint's come off, and then I'm doing the same with the Stormhost Silver, but going over all the metal. So whether it's gold or silver or the blue that we used, I'm making sure it gets a nice dry coat all over it, and this is going to give us a nice highlight. Then I'm taking some Abaddon Black, and this is a base paint, and I'm going to put some blue tack on the end of that vegan brush, and then I'm going to take my model, pop it on, and then that's going to hold the model in place, and then we get a little turntable so that when we paint the base rim, we're going to get it nice and controlled, and we can spin that model so we can keep our hand and brush in the same place all the time. It makes it so much easier. And so giving it a nice coat, I just go one nice thick coat all over. You could water it down and do two, but I just find one works really well, and I chose black this time. And there we go, that's our model finished. There's Vasillac the Gifted from the Dread Pageant, painted to a tabletop ready standard with mostly contrast paint and some techniques of layering the contrast paint over the metallic paint. I was really happy with how he turned out. Used a lot more paint colours than I thought I would, but I think we got a nice effect here, and this real bling look is going to be a nice contrast against Mayari's purifiers that are also included in the Diachasm set. But we can use this same technique to paint all the miniatures that were included in the Dread Pageant, except for Slate Clash, whose skin we did a little bit different, but I'll be doing a video on him real soon, so you'll be able to see that soon too. And all the paints we use in this video, I'll put links for in the description below, and then you can be able to get them from Element Games, and there'll be affiliate links, but it won't cost you anything extra. In fact, you can save up to 20% there on all your game products, your paints, your models, and for every sale made through a link, I get a small commission, and that's going to help me do loads more videos like this. So thanks so much for that support. It's really brilliant, and I really appreciate it. If you like this kind of content and would like to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page, and thanks to everyone who's joined so far. It's really awesome. We hang out on Discord, talk about the hobby, share ideas and help each other out, and you'll get some perks there that you're not going to find anywhere else. So I'll put a link in the description, and it'd be great to see you there. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. I really love reading the comments and appreciate all your thoughts and feedback. But thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.